I know I have to just slow down and just let the play start, develop, and finish. So it's a constant internal dialogue. There have been times in my career, earlier in my career, not much lately, where I would become angry. I'd be angry or frustrated, either at myself because I missed a play, or at some perceived slight I felt from a coach, and I would be angry. And then one of the ways I worked through that was I used to say to myself, never give a technical foul angry. Never. If you don't have complete control of yourself, you can't control the game. So before I can do this, I got to do it myself. And so you work on those things. You have to always be controlling your environment. And I think when the game slows down, I think that's what it just moves to your pace. And it's no different than, when you take a walk with somebody, you're either going to speed up or you're going to slow down. But you got generally going to walk at the same pace. The question is, are you walking at your pace or are you walking at their pace? And I think you can recognize that. And sometimes this person's going to pull me. I need to go to his pace. And sometimes you don't. So I think all those things are just things you have to recognize, and they're just things you have to deal with internally to make you a better official.
All right, I'm excited to welcome in an extremely talented, well-seasoned official, one of the more recognizable referee faces we've seen over the years, 22-year NBA vet from the Windy City, and according to the NBRA, you are an avid outdoorsman. I'd like to welcome Mr. Marc Davis to the podcast. How you doing, sir?
I am well. We got to update that, as I've been locked in my house for the last 10 weeks. I haven't been doing a lot of outdoorsman activities lately. And that has transitioned from a lot of hiking and a lot of winter camping to more just golfing. And I've gotten soft in my older age. So
that's what happens.
Tel Aviv. That's what happens, huh? Right. Just gotta be hard when it gets hard, right?
True. Well, that's coming for you, hopefully sooner than later.
Yeah.
Really appreciate you coming on, and I'm really eager to talk officiating with you because I know you have so much to offer. But before we get into that, just take me through your time at home. If you could share your thoughts on adapting to this pandemic, what has been your mindset through this time?
I have to say, and my family's in the kitchen around the corner here, so you may get maybe a spatula thrown at me or something along those lines. But I am, despite the stress of the unknowing, I am really enjoying my time at home. This is probably the longest stretch of time I've had with my wife and 3 kids in 20 years, and I'm rather enjoying the time with them. We're a 1-4 vote on that. I'm outvoted 1-4 on that one. But it comes with its pitfalls. I'm a senior in high school, and that's been a very difficult experience for him. But he's much like his father, very pragmatic, and he said he could have been in a foxhole in Vietnam, or he could have been on the beach in Normandy in the senior year. And so sit on the couch and stay inside really is not that big of a challenge, and that's about our perspective on it right now as a family.
It's a great perspective to have. I'm trying to take a similar approach, just appreciating the fact that nobody that I know has been affected by this. So that's most important. And like you said, just getting a lot of high quality family time has been great.
That's good. Who's 1 for 3? That's good. Thought they waved it off. As they say, he kicked Tobias Harris, kicked that leg out. And I thought that was a very good call by Marc Davis.
Thanks for sharing that. So let's talk a little hoops. Please take us through your journey with basketball from when you first started out officiating to eventually becoming an NBA Finals crew chief.
My journey through officiating has been one that I think it's synonymous with not only other officials' careers, but also my life. Just every corner I turn, there's a helping hand to help me out. When officiating, I was coaching a freshman basketball team, doing some subbing at Hales Franciscan High School. The woman I was subbing for came back from work and I needed a job. And the athletic director at the time suggested that I referee some because the Chicago public schools, the grammar schools, they play during the daytime. So I could referee a couple games and still be available for practice in the afternoon. My dear friend, Pete Thompson, is an executive in the financial services industry and a pretty accomplished man on his own. But at that point, he had just retired from his 2-year officiating career post-college, and he loaned me his shirt, gave me a whistle, and through a family friend, I was able to get a game. There was, just as there is now, there were more games than there were officials. So my very first game, I went to a grammar school with my 4XL shirt, posing as a blouse, some sweatpants, and my whistle with a P in it, my metal whistle with a P in it. And at halftime, Mr. Fred Mills, who was the coach of the school I was working, who also was just so happened, he was one of the Little League dads. One of his son was one of my good buddies. He coached Little League baseball with my father, and I'd known him. And at halftime, he came up to me and he said, "Hey, man," when I was walking out, he said, "Hey, Marc," and he handed me a Fox 40 whistle. And he said, "Hey, real referees don't use those kind of whistles. Use this whistle." So that was an interaction I had with the coach at that time. I switched the whistle. I worked the game. At the end of the game, he paid me, and it was way more money than I was making a day teaching 4 or 5 algebra and geometry classes. And he asked me, did I like it? I said, I liked the money. And I said, but it was fun. He said, well, come to my house Saturday. So that Saturday, I went to his house, and he assigned a CYO tournament out on the west side of Chicago at Old Resurrection Grammar School. And I went out there, and he and one of his buddies kind of showed me around, and I worked a half of all 8 games that day. I left my shoes, and I got all the way out there, and I didn't have gym shoes. All I had was my boots. It was in the wintertime. So I ran around the block. There's an old famous shoe shine place called Shine King out on the west side of Chicago. And I asked them if they had any, because all the Foot Lockers, everything was closed. First game was at 8, and they had an old pair of bowling shoes. And so I bought them for $5. I put the bowling shoes on, and I worked like I was supposed to work one game. I ended up working, as I said, I ended up working parts of 8 games. And that was the first day officiating, and I was bitten by it and smitten by it from very much at the onset. I really was captivated by it. And that was in, let me see, that was in, she came back after Thanksgiving. That was in December of 95. And that was the first day I ever refereed. And because it was the last Friday before school let out for Christmas. And I was hired in the NBA January 1 of 99. Yeah, because it was at the end of the lockout. So it was a short and sweet part. It was very intense time. Well before Malcolm Gladwell was writing about the 10,000 hours. Inherently, I knew that I had an opportunity to really do something because of the amount of basketball that was in Chicago. I mean, from that day until maybe the week before I got hired in the NBA, I know I never went more than 2 days without refereeing in that space of time. Soon thereafter, as you know, as referees, you have referees. You go from one mentor to another. A famous referee, a very successful referee here in Chicago, Mao Kason, was one of the top high school referees. I had known him since I was 8. He started the Biddy basketball program that I worked in. He got me started. From there, there was Charlie Brown, who assigned the public school for the Chicago public schools and was a great player in his own right. He lived actually between floors between both my parents. My parents lived on the second floor. My mother lived on the second floor. My dad lived on the fourth. Browns lived on the third floor. He took me under his wing, got me started. And then soon thereafter, a month or 2 into refereeing, I started working with Keith McClellan, Lionel Yates, and Terry Murphy, and they were all in the CBA. So very quickly into my refereeing development, I was with people that were really fast, fast chargers and hard movers, and really knew were on the cutting edge of officiating at that time. So I really credit them with my success, because I was told the right way from the beginning. So it was difficult to learn, and they were hard on me, but I never had really any bad habits to break. From there, rolled into, Danny Crawford and Bill Jones and James Capers from the city. James and I grew up about 4 blocks from each other, really good friends with his younger brother. So it wasn't long before he started helping me. So I'm really just the product of all of those gentlemen and the help that they gave me. Pam Young, just the help that they gave me through that time, really. I just was excited about it. I knew I wanted to do it early in my career. I knew I wanted to be an NBA referee. I think it was that next year there was an officials lockout, and I remember watching the officials work on TV, and they announced someone, and he was 22 years old, and I think I was 26 at the time, and I was like, I'm so far behind the 8 ball. I wrote David Stern a letter. I wrote Matt Winnick a letter, Aaron Wade a letter. I think those are and sent them faxes as well. And none of them took my calls or respond to my faxes or anything, except for Matt Winnick. I called, and he answered the phone, and he said, we got your letter. If you're good enough, we'll find you. And he hung up the phone on me. And and that was, from one, there's so many stories from one thing to the next on someone touching me, helping me out, from John Guthrie. Those 3 gentlemen invited me to go to the Southeastern Conference. They had a camp for officials that were all under the age of 30 in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and John Guthrie was a signer for the SEC at that time. But that was the gist of it. He wanted young officials that were kind of raw, and I went to his camp, and that's pretty interesting. Who was there? And I think about around the room that day. Pat Frere was there, Courtney Kirkland was there, Derek Collins was there, Jason Phillips was there, and they had all been refereeing a lot longer than me, but we were all under 30. And from there, that's where Daryl Garrettson, saw me referee, and I was in the CBA the next year, and then a couple seasons later, I was in the NBA.
You are listening to the Crown Refs Podcast, the audio experience for basketball officials. Serve the game. Sounds like you've had a plethora of great mentors that really gave you a great foundation of education starting off. Did you work college Division I?
I did. I probably worked about 5 or 6 college games. Mr. Guthrie would give me games. I pretty much only worked with Jim Ferrari, another gentleman out of Detroit. And I worked in the OVC. So I worked a couple of East Illinois games. I worked maybe 5 or 6 games over 2 years when I was there in college. But primarily I worked in the CBA, and primarily I worked in the Chicago Public League, to be honest. That's where I did until probably my 3rd year in the NBA. The Chicago Public League was still the league that I had worked more games in than any other league.
I'm sure you got great experience and reps from those games.
Yeah, in the public league, I'm trying to think. In the public league and the city colleges, the junior colleges of Chicago, the city colleges, when I got to the NBA, I had refereed more NBA players when they were in high school and in junior college than I had from any of the college games that I did.
Wow.
I would definitely say that. That was probably the wide expanse of my experience was mostly in the public league. The basketball was so good. The junior college basketball was so strong. And I just wasn't around long enough to get an opportunity to do that. But early on, I knew I wanted to be a professional basketball referee. So it's all good.
Gordon trying to defend Lillard, and going to call Gordon for the foul. His first, and now technical. I think Marc Davis has heard enough. from both Mike D'Antoni and the Rocket players. They were complaining a lot in the first half. He said, "I'm done." It looked like Marc Davis just said, "I'm done."
So, Marc, you've worked over 1,200 NBA games, including 132 playoff games, 12 NBA finals. What are some of your more memorable games or moments in your career?
Wow, my more memorable moments. So many, and not to skirt the question, but that's why I was asking you. We were talking about this before, and really, not one of them comes to mind. My most memorable now will be my next one, the one I'm looking forward to, and that's kind of always been my approach. I remember one time my dad and James were having a conversation, and it was early in both of our careers, and wonder when we were going to get a TV game, and was this game bigger than that game, and what was this game, and when we were going to get a big game. And I remember my dad saying something earlier. This was really my first year in the NBA. He said, if you think your game is small, mess it up and see how small it is. You want to turn one of your game, they're all big.
Right.
And that's kind of, I've always sat with that. They are all big, and they all require your 100% participation and effort and everything that you have to give and all the skills that you can muster to get through them. So I've never really, I don't know that I have a memorable moment. Probably, ones that come to mind, I've been so partner-centric. I think about the times when, Steve Javie's last game. I think about, games with Danny Crawford, Joey Crawford. That was the reason why I wanted to be an NBA referee, was because of the relationships and the talent and kind of the sense of dedication. It was just really a fast-moving group, and I just so desperately wanted to be a part of that. So most of my memories center around times with family where my partners got a chance to meet my family. I've got a chance to meet their families. So those are the things that probably are most memorable to me, as opposed to a game, a charge, a play, something along those lines.
I love that you chose people, because, we're able to develop such great relationships with our partners, going to war with them, in every game. So you develop kind of relationships you can't find anywhere else.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
So one of the things you said was your most memorable game is going to be your next one. Any idea when that's going to be?
No, no idea. I wish I did. One thing I am certain about is I know that we will rebound from this. I do know that all hands are on deck in terms of trying to find a safe solution for return to the court. I think I speak for all of the participants, all of the constituents in the NBA and the fans, that we have the utmost confidence in Adam. He was the first person to realize the seriousness of this and to cease operations. And I think that was the right decision. And I think when we come back and how we come back will also be the right decision. All I can tell you is that I know that there are a lot of smart people, motivated people that are really trying to find a way. And so what day that'll be, who knows? But I'm certain that there will be one, and I'm certain that it'll be done safe, efficiently, and get our players back on the floor, and probably put the most entertaining sport in the world, in my opinion, back in front of the world view for everyone to see.
Well, thanks for that. That was reassuring, for sure. I feel better. I feel better after hearing you say that. So.
Should be encouraged.
I know a lot of people are on the edge of their seat just waiting. So I'm sure
yeah,
you as well. So
I'm on the edge. We're all on that edge, waiting too, hoping that it happens sooner than later.
So when we spoke off air, one of the real interesting things that you said that stood out was instruction through tension, and being able to recognize emotions. And that's something I don't think we really do, either in a game or looking back. So if you could just talk to me about those two things: instruction through tension and recognizing our emotions.
Well, I think they go hand in hand. I think if you take something in a sterile lab and you're looking at plays, other people's plays, there's kind of levels to it. If you're watching a game on TV, you're emotionally detached. You're watching it. You have the benefit of the rewind button. You have that extra second to make the decision. You get the different angles, easy to make those decisions. Now start throwing in some variables into calculus, like it's your game, watching it on video. Sometimes we can be a little bit more defensive. It becomes a little different. Sometimes you're watching the game with someone else who works. That can happen. Now you're adding emotions to it. Now put yourself on the floor. Put yourself on the floor doing something you've done a bunch of different times, probably easier, as opposed to putting yourself in an environment that you've never been before, probably a little bit more difficult. So I think if you work backwards with that and you start to look at, when you're watching your games and you're going through instructing yourself, because that's really the only way you really get good is to have someone teach you something. You own it to the point where you can now objectively critique your own performance. And I think one of the things we miss is we always look at where you're standing, who are you looking at, what happened. Mm-hmm. But there's a difference. And so we look at where, and we made a mistake, look at where we fell. Or did we slip? This is where we fall. But I think much of the real improvement in officiating comes is when you look at where did you slip, because you slip before you fall. It's a slip and fall. And too many times we're focused on the fall and we don't load to the slip. And the slip is really the cause of that problem. And if we deal with the slip doesn't necessarily, it might be a step down in the lead. It might be a little wider in the lead. It might be outside in position at the trail. It might be moving on the pass at the slot. But it also might be, I lost my concentration. Coach got irritated me on the other end. I was nervous. I was anxious. I was afraid. Those are all parts of how we make decisions, because we've all spent times where we've looked up at the ceiling all night on a play and you're like, I know I was looking right at it. How did I not make that call? And you watch it over and over and over again. And I remember watching tape with Daryl Garrettson years and years ago. And I made a mistake and we were looking at the play, and then he told me the mistake and he said, now, this was the beginning of the game. He said, I'm about to leave. You watch the rest of the game. He said, now don't beat yourself up. You make this mistake 46 more times. But the problem is, I don't want you to make it 47 times. So you're going to watch this tape. I've told you what you've done incorrectly. I don't want to see you do that again tomorrow. But don't beat yourself up tonight, because you made this same mistake about 46 times tonight. What I'm telling you for is so to tomorrow you don't make that mistake. So now you add that piece in it. So what was going through your head when you made that decision? And I think if we don't really address what our emotions were, what our thoughts were, then we can't ever correct them, because you're going to be nervous. You're going to be anxious. You're sometimes going to be afraid. There's a difference between you having a fear and a fear having you. And I think too many times when we want to macho up, we want to macho up about a play or a situation, and we don't really address what was really going on between our ears, then we're really not in a position to address that the next time it happens, so that we can work through that. So it's not about, you talked about moments and times that were memorable to me. I can think of my very first playoff game where I was walking out on the floor and it was a completely different atmosphere. I couldn't feel my forearms. Just, you know what I mean? It was like a completely different atmosphere. I pinching my forearms, and it was like I wasn't touching anything. It was like nothing was there. And all that was going to be a culmination. To perform in that environment was going to be a culmination of whatever habits I had created through that time. And what was real comforting for me in that situation was not that I was afraid, but that I had refereed nervous and anxious before. And I knew what to say to myself to make sure that I could perform through that nervousness and that anxiousness. So one thing I just said, referee the defense, stay in your primary, call obvious plays, trust your partners. Just do those 4 things. Keep breathing. Count to 10. Buy ones. Take your time, and then you'll make it through. And that had been happening to me. I've been addressing those feelings my entire career. So, your first playoff game, your first finals game, your first callback game, your first Eastern Conference games are all just different examples of what your very first preseason game was like. Because even though, and I may be working in my 23rd year, I may be working, I don't know how many preseason games, but if I'm working with a young lady who this is the first time she's been on an NBA floor, I'm not going to dismiss the fact that this is a big deal to her.
Right.
And I don't want her to dismiss the fact that this is a big deal. I want her to take this experience, this nervousness, because her next preseason game, she's not going to have that again. She needs to remember those nerves and those anxieties and those emotions for her first regular season game, for the first time she's on TNT, for the first time she's worked a playoff game, so that she can go to those places and say, it's like that scary man. He's never going to go away. You just name him, call my guy Herb. My scary man jumps on my shoulder. I'm like, what up, Herb? You've been here before. You know what we do. Sit tight. We're going to make our way through. I don't dismiss the fact that I'm nervous or anxious or Herb is here. I just have to work through it. And so I think that's a lot of what we talk about when we're watching tape is you made this mistake. Okay, you were right where you're supposed to be. You were looking where you're supposed to be. You were doing all the things you're supposed to do. But what were you thinking about? Did what the coach say to you on the other end make you lose your concentration for a moment? What were you able to do? How are you able to get yourself back to concentrating to get on point to what we're supposed to do? Because I believe that if you take an official and you show them what to look at, where to stand, what to look at, and you can teach them what is and is not a foul, if you can get them to harness their emotions, they will be a successful official without question. Without question. I hope that's a roundabout way of answering. But yes.
Oh, that's great stuff. That's great stuff. So once you do identify these motions, I was nervous. Coach got in my head. I know you gave us a couple.
Mm-hmm.
What else do you do to kind of overcome that? Or how would you recommend other officials overcoming, basically fighting their fears on the court?
Yeah, fears are different emotions. I mean, look, sometimes there are times on the floor where you become angry, you become frustrated, you become disappointed in yourself. And I think just as we teach players, officials, any performance, you got to get to the next play. So if I don't think, I may become frustrated by not answering a question in an appropriate manner, and I leave an engagement on one end and I haven't addressed it the way I think is appropriate, or in a manner that gives that player, that participant, the answer to their question. And I'm still thinking about what I should have said as I get to the next play, and I'm in the slot and I get a curl play and I miss it, a tip on the elbow, because I'm thinking about that. That's important. So what I have to do is I have to start recognizing that, leave it where it is, and know that I'll come back to it at a different point. Oh, I didn't answer that question. Okay, back to it. Referee the defense. Stay in the primary. Call the obvious. First dribble's his. Second dribble's mine. Those are the things in constant self-talk. And then sometimes I find myself talking too much to myself, and I know I have to just slow down and just let the play start, develop, and finish. So it's a constant internal dialogue. There have been times in my career, earlier in my career, not much lately, where I would become angry. I'd be angry or frustrated, either at myself because I missed a play, or at some perceived slight I felt from a coach, and I would be angry. And then one of the ways I worked through that was I used to say to myself, never give it a technical foul angry. Never. If you don't have complete control of yourself, you can't control the game. So before I can do this, I got to do it myself. And so you work on those things. You have to always be controlling your environment. And I think when the game slows down, I think that's what it just moves to your pace. And it's no different than, when you take a walk with somebody, you're either going to speed up or you're going to slow down, but you got generally going to walk at the same pace. The question is, are you walking at your pace or are you walking at their pace? And I think you can recognize that. And sometimes this person's going to pull me. I need to go to his pace. And sometimes you don't. So I think all those things are just things you have to recognize. And they're just things you have to deal with internally to make you a better official.
Marc, something I get asked pretty frequently with Crown refs, and it's if I have access to a red flag list. I mean, we got Scott Foster talking about a red flag list, Joey Crawford, Al Batista. Do you know the whereabouts of this red flag list, and can you name a few items in it?
I'm going to have to give Scotty credit to that. Although I can say the first person I ever heard that from was him. I know Al stole it from Scott. No question about that. And Joey may have said that to him, but I don't ever remember Joey talking to me about a red flag list. I just remember always talking to Scott about it. And someone just asked me about it. And I used to have it written down somewhere, but I looked through everywhere and I couldn't find it. As a matter of fact, we're having a Zoom session tonight, and actually Scott's going to participate. He's going to go over the red flags. I asked the young guys are on. We're organized during this COVID break. The G League, the W, and the NBA referees, all members of the NBRA, we're in, like, each of us is like 11 pods of 8 officials.
Oh, that's great.
And you kind of have a text chain with your guys, do a Zoom call once a week. You figure out another group. We've had Marc on, we've had Monty, we've had Joey. And so this week, my pod has Scott talking about just that, red flags.
I just forwarded to us when you're done, right?
I just forward that to you. Yeah, I'll take some screenshots and forward that to you.
Thank you.
Yes, there's some red flags. Well, one of the new red flags I know we've discussed recently is at the beginning of the season is with the new timeouts. So, when there's 3 timeouts, 3 minutes, expect, there's 3:08 as a rebound. You got to pay attention to the coaches because they may want to get burned on and burn an extra timeout and lose one. They may call a quick one. A loose ball foul where you're going to the other end. You got to make sure you're looking at the table to make sure that they don't misconstrue that as an offensive foul. And then you have to listen to the PA announcer to make sure he announces, number 22 offensive foul when you call a loose ball foul. Offensive foul is not a team foul. Loose ball foul is. So those are some red flags. Let me think of some other ones. A double hammer screen or any exchange is something that you want to pay attention to on the screen. On the exchange when there's a dribble handoff, usually there's a time speed exchange. First team fouls in the last 2 minutes. That's what the last one.
Any other play calling guidelines you want to mention before we move on?
Oh, I think a lot of things we're talking about, and I guess we're going to look at a few plays later, are just sequencing. I think sequencing is an important thing. Something that intuitively I think Mark Wunderlich is really a mensch. I mean, he is a genius when it comes to identifying and teaching officiating. I mean, really, like, super special. I mean, obviously, I have to say, if you had to put on the Mount Rushmore of officials in terms of teaching, I think the Mount Rushmore would probably be Daryl Garrettson, Ed T. Rush. I mean, I'm putting Marc's got GOAT status almost with the teaching.
I think there's 3 ways to learn. You hear it on this podcast, right?
Yep.
You see it when you watch your tape.
Yep.
And then you go out and you do it. So it's hear, see, do, right? And there are 3 things you have to do. You listen to this podcast, you try and apply some things, you watch your film, and then you try and adjust things that you want to do better.
Yeah, I mean, Marc really has big shout out to Marc. He's he really is special with that. I mean, Daryl, obviously, the inventor of the 3-person system as we know it, referee and the defender comments. There's so many. I mean, I think about things that Joey's told me, that Mindy told him, things that Danny told me, that Forrest Harris told him. I mean, that officiating has been so passed down.
Yeah.
It's probably difficult to say one teacher, but So all a roundabout way of saying the capturing of sequencing, something that I think we inherently did, but really capturing it and memorializing it so that it can be taught, up, down, rebound, screen and defender line. I just think those are just really been phenomenal in terms of what we do on the floor.
This is a question from Chris Buccelli, who's a Crown Refs audience member. We talked about having that next play mentality. What are some coping methods that you use to relieve stress at the critical moments?
Well, one, breathe. And when I mean breathe, not only breathe in terms of taking a deep breath and just calming yourself, but really locating where your air is. And I think that's an exercise that was taught and by Danny Crawford, just to keeping your air low. And there's a big difference in having your air up around, when you get excited, you get anxious, and your air gets up higher, higher, higher in your throat, and then boop, it comes out. And are you really have control over it? And as opposed to the air being real well down in your diaphragm, and then block, first block, and then you're able to catch it because it gives you that extra piece of being there. And when I think about that, I don't remember the year, probably the 97 Eastern Conference Finals. I believe it was the Knicks Bulls. I don't really remember that because I don't look at it from that perspective. Like even watching The Last Dance these last couple of weeks, we're all sitting there as a family, and my kids and my wife would say, "What are you watching the same thing that we're watching?" Because I would say, "There's Nolan Fine, look at Tommy Nunez, look at Joey there." I'm watching it through those lenses. So I don't really remember. I just remember one of the greatest sequencing plays and continuous plays was Charles Smith underneath the basket. And I think like Scottie Pippen, Horace Grant, Michael Jordan, like each blocked his shot twice. And I just remember Ed T being on the baseline, and you can just see the air down in his gut, and he's watching each one of these plays, and he's catching himself, and they're all good blocks. And that there's just not a more intense place for official to be. So those are the things in terms of knowing where your air is to get through the next play. Because at the end of the day, all of this is just habitual. You're just a sum total of your habits. And if you have good habits, you might be able to get through it at one point, but it'll sneak out on you at a bad point, and your sum total of your habits. So I'm certain that Ed T refereed, preseason game 22 the same way he refereed that game, and that allowed him to be able to do it. And so those are the things I think about in terms of next play. It's just really basic. Anybody who's elite in anything, you pick a group. So I'll just say elite officials. They just do what the regular officials do better. They just do the basics better. They don't do anything super. They just do it better. They just do the basics better. That's what being elite is. You just do the basics better than everyone else. That's what makes you elite. Not, and so our basics are really predicated on our habits. And so really good habits is what really takes you to those places. So when I find my mind wandering, I go back to my habits. And it's just referee the defense, stand your primary, call the obvious, trust your partner, and be trustworthy for what you're responsible for. Because we have a system in place. I was watching some tape yesterday with a group of people when we were watching the game from last year, and we missed a couple plays. And, and I get it. A lot of times younger, they want to go right to the mistakes, went to mistakes. And I kind of knew I was in the game, so I figured there were going to be some plays in there they wanted to talk about. And they talked about, like, I had a play that I didn't call that my partner called. Like, why didn't you? I was like, I don't know. Let's go back. Why didn't I? Let's look at the two plays before. I lost my concentration for a moment. I was going through it, and I couldn't figure out whether it was. And the good news was my partner had to play for me. And then we went on the next play, and same thing happened, except it reversed. So we're not always going to be perfect, but if we can rally around each other and work the system is pretty good. The system that we have is pretty good in terms of if you're going to get it, get it. And if you have doubt, then you don't. And you got trust that somebody else is going to get it. And if they don't, it just doesn't get got. And you move on. But if it's important, if you take all those things and you can take secondary areas of coverage and you take, is it blatant and obvious? It'll be gotten. But, we discussed this many times about going outside of your primary, judging your partners. That's bad medicine. That's not going to work well for you. So I try to center myself and get back to my habits and back to what the fundamentals are, which are referee defense, stay in your primary, call the obvious, the basics.
Love how you said how elite officials just do the basics better. That's such a, simple way of realizing what it takes to get to that next level. What else are you passionate about? I know you're the union rep for NBA referees. Talk to us about your off the court work with the MBRA.
I'm very passionate about it. It's been, 9-10 years that I've been in this position. I'm proud of the work that we as an executive board and we as a union have accomplished. Where our wages and the relationship that we've created with the league and collaborating for better wages, better benefits, and a better retirement for officials. No matter what you do, no matter the importance where we are in terms of, our status in the league, you cannot play a game without a referee. And I wish that we as the collective would understand our worth. Officiating, you always come into it as an independent contractor. And we hear, that's my game, I did this. And we're always in this mindset of wanting them to like me a little bit more than they like you. And the reality of it is, as human beings, all of our assigners care for us about the same. But at the end of the day, it's how we perform and the collective of how we work together that's really going to make the difference. Any of our leagues can go on without any one of us individually, but none of our leagues can go on without all of us collectively. And so I think we've done a good job in terms of, and we're constantly working on it in terms of the culture of the NBRA and what we stand for in terms of who we work for, who we represent, and how we represent each other. And I think a part of that, if you take into account the fact that now the NBRA, which now consists of the WNBA, the G League, and the NBRA officials, because, a rising tide lifts all boats. And you can't have
merged.
Yeah, together, because we all work for the same organization. We all work for the same company, all collectively trying to elevate the level of officiating, and not only in our sport. I think we're blessed to have an organization that is supportive of labor. They understand that the stronger your labor force is, the more organized your labor force is, the less friction that there actually is in the relationship. Imagine what it'd be like to negotiate 70 different contracts versus one. So I think, I'm a strong proponent of the labor movement. I come from Chicago. A. Philip Randolph first, organized the Porters. I just think it's being dismissed, because I think it's really what creates a strong middle class, and it's really what has made America as strong, much of a draw, and where people want to come, where everyone has a fair chance. And if you start overlooking, labor unions, and you start thinking about that, and you start thinking about the things that they've done, like created the weekend, time and a half, organization, those are things that are that we take for granted, that weren't always for granted. And I'm just confident that, and I'm really grateful to see, and even now starting to expand to where we have a lot of relationships. We're starting to build relationships with Major League Baseball, with the World Umpire Association, and the NHL's Referee Association, and NFL, and with soccer and the PSRA. And it's just all about, we're all trying to get these plays right and provide an environment where our athletes can showcase their abilities and the collective good that they do in their communities, and how, as a vehicle, even in our local high school associations, as a vehicle, just think about the importance of the high school football team and the importance of that collective and that community in games, and that those games be officiated correctly and efficiently. And I think sometimes we've started to dismiss officials and dismiss our importance. And I think there's going to come a day where, particularly in the summertime, well, if we're not going to be continually respected, or we're going to be disrespectful, it becomes a situation where official is really concerned for their health and safety, where we've gotten to the point where you can just be that dismissive and that abusive towards officials. Well, they should maybe have a couple of weekends where there are no officials and see how that goes for the summertime sports programs. And so that's one of the things that I think our leagues and all the major sports leagues are trying to do, is set a better example of how we deal with each other. I think many times, even in our game, there's a lot of talk about tension and contentiousness between players. And that's just not my experience. You're talking about type A personalities, hyper-competitive organizations that, look, an NBA franchise's community service department is uber competitive with another NBA's franchise's community service department. There's nothing, the marketing department wants to outdo another team's marketing department. I mean, you're talking about a hyper-competitive type A personality. And so there's always going to be a little bit of that tension, but there's always been a respect. And I have rarely, if ever, seen that go off of the court. It is what it is. You deal with it. You keep on moving to the next play, the next game, the next season. We're all, constituents in this game and trying to build this game and make it a bigger and better game. And I think we do a good job of that. And I think, the fact that I think if you look at what Adam Silver's done with all the unions on the property, with the Players Association, now with the WNBA, them being organized, their Players Association being organized, even after the officials, G League players were organized, they get it. And I think that that's why basketball, in particular the NBA family, is going to be probably the most popular sport in the world in the next 15 years.
Well, a lot of people are getting weekends off now. So hopefully post-pandemic, I think post-pandemic, you would think sportsmanship would go up a little bit. Now that players, coaches, fans, everybody has dealt with no sports, you would think when we hit the reset button, people would be a little nicer.
I hope so. I really do. I hope so. The NBRA, the NBPA, the NBA management spent so much time working on that, trying to get that message out of sportsmanship. So many people follow our players. The reason why the fans are so passionate, and that's a different thing in the arenas, is because our teams are so passionate in their markets. I mean, when you look at what the teams do in their markets and their communities to give back, the people in those communities love and they really enjoy it. And so they're passionate about it, but they don't want the game per se to be fair. They want to win.
Right.
I find that hilarious. They say, I just want it fair. I hear people on the side and say, I just want it fair. I'm like, come on, man, ask for what you really want.
They're under the influence of emotion. They're under the influence of emotion.
God bless them for it too.
Yeah.
God bless them for it, because they want their team to win. And that's where we come in as officials, because it's impossible. People don't understand it, that we just don't care who wins. And that's a difficult concept for people, because everyone cares to win except those three people. And plays right, going to provide an environment where everybody can be successful, and our phenomenal athletes can really showcase their talents, and our collective teams can really showcase their abilities and their cohesiveness together. And we want to stay out of the way. Sometimes you have to get in for a quick minute, you get out, and you move on. So what? So they can get to the next play.
Well said, Marc. Do you have any time we could look at some plays? Love to have your team notes. Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll be right back. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Tune to the next episode to watch Marc Davis on Game Notes. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Crime Refs Podcast. Serve the game.